Welcome back to the Midnight Tapes. Get comfortable. Turn the lights down low, pull the blanket up, and let the rain settle in around you. And tonight, especially, welcome, because tonight is the last tape of the season, the 20th. And whether this is the first one you've found, or whether you've drifted off to every single one before it, I'm glad you're here for this. I've never told you where the tapes come from. 20 times now I've sat in the dark and shared these stories with you, and you've never asked and I've never said. So tonight, the last night of the season, I'll tell you a little. The tapes are collected. That's what I do. I collect them. The recordings, the accounts, the stories people leave behind, the things whispered into machines in the dark. I gather them and I keep them, and once in a while, late at night, I play them for whoever's listening. For you. And tonight's tapes are a little different from the others, because some of them are about the tapes themselves, about the collecting, about me, and about you, the one who listens in the dark. You don't have to stay awake for all of them. You never have. Let your eyes close whenever they want to. That's what these are for. You're safe here. You've always been safe here. The door is locked, the rain is soft, and the dark is just the dark. Let's begin one last time this season. Before the first story begins, I want the beginning to breathe a little longer tonight. A season finale should not rush. It should feel the way a house feels after midnight when the guests have left and only one lamp remains on. It should feel like the last page of a notebook you have carried in your coat all winter. The page you saved because you did not want to admit the notebook was almost done. This tape is not meant to slam the door. It is meant to close it softly, with your hands still on the handle, while the rain keeps speaking in the background. All season, the stories have taken us through places people try to control. Houses, hospitals, roads, screens, forests, cities, water, sleep. Again and again the lesson has been the same, though the shapes have changed. The dark is never empty in the way we want emptiness to mean. It holds memory. It holds attention. It holds old rules, old griefs, old hungers, and sometimes old kindnesses. But there has always been a second lesson too, and I hope you heard it under the fear. The dark can be shared. A frightening place becomes different when someone sits beside you and says, "I see it too. I hear it too. I will stay until it passes." That is what the tapes have tried to do. They do not deny the dark. They do not laugh at the little fears that keep people awake. They sit with them. They give them a shape and a voice, and then they let the rain soften the edges. In a world that asks us to be alert all the time, brave all the time, productive and bright and awake all the time, there is mercy in a voice that says you can be tired now. You can be frightened and still rest. You can listen to the strangest stories and still be safe in your own bed, because the story is here, and you are there, and the distance between them is being held carefully. So tonight, as the last tape of the season begins, think of this not as an ending but as a long exhale. Let the season gather behind you. Let the figures in the stories take their seats. Let the unplayed tape remain unplayed. Let the rain keep its low secret. Let the voice do what it has done from the beginning. Make the room feel less empty. Make the night feel less wide. Make sleep feel like a place someone has checked ahead of you and found safe enough to enter. The tapes will return, but tonight's work is only this: to listen as long as you want, to drift whenever you can, and to know that whatever strange machinery moves behind these recordings, you are being guided gently through it. The first tape. You've never asked how I started collecting the tapes. So let me begin there on the last night with the first one. It was years ago, before any of this, before there was a voice in the dark for anyone to fall asleep to. I was a different person then, ordinary, sleepless, lonely in the way that drives people to strange hobbies. I collected old things, estate sales, second-hand shops, the cast-off belongings of the dead and the departed. And at one such sale, in a box of forgotten junk, I found a cassette tape, unlabeled, old, the kind of thing no one wanted. I almost left it. I'm glad, and I'm sorry that I didn't. I took it home and played it, expecting nothing. Old music, maybe, or silence, or the hiss of a tape long erased. What I heard instead was a voice, person, alone, recording themselves in the dark, telling a story. A true story, they said, something that had happened to them, something they couldn't tell anyone, something they had to get out of themselves somehow, so they whispered it into a tape recorder in the night and then, I suppose, let it go, left it in a box to be sold, to be found, to be heard by a stranger years later in the dark. It was a scary story, a real one, and it was mesmerizing, and it was true, and when it ended I sat in the silence for a long time, and then I played it again. That was the first tape, and something about it, the intimacy of it, a frightened person confiding their darkest experience to a machine in the night, and that confession traveling across the years to reach me. Something about it changed me. I needed more. I began to look for them, and once you start looking, you find that they're everywhere. People have always whispered their true, frightening experiences into the dark, into tape recorders, into answering machines, into voice memos, into the night itself. The things too strange to tell, too frightening to keep inside. They record them and they let them go, and the recordings drift out into the world, waiting to be collected. So I collected them. I have been collecting them ever since. And the tape you are listening to right now is part of that collection. One more voice in the dark, telling you something true the way that first voice told me. I still have that first tape. Of all the hundreds I've gathered since, it's the one I keep closest, because it started everything. This whole strange life of collecting the dark confessions of strangers and playing them back for other strangers in the night. And sometimes I wonder about the person who recorded it alone all those years ago, whether they ever imagined that their whispered story would be found and kept and played and would become the seed of all of this, of the voice you fall asleep to, of the tapes you've spent these nights with, of this very moment, you and me in the dark. They let their story go into the night, never knowing where it would land. It landed with me, and now, in a way, it's landed with you. The first tape, passed on and on and on in the dark. The rain's still falling. Stay with me. Here's the next one. There are details about that first tape that I almost never include, because they sound too small to matter until you have lived with a collection for long enough to understand that the small details are the ones that tell the truth. The estate sale was held in a narrow house at the edge of town. One of those houses where every room smelled faintly of dust, old curtains, and furniture polish. The family running it had already taken anything valuable. What remained were the things no one knew how to price. Chipped mugs, cracked picture frames, bent kitchen tools, shoeboxes of photographs with no names on the backs, and a cardboard box of tapes under a folding table in the room that had once been the den. I remember kneeling there because I was tired of standing, lifting each cassette, feeling the cracked plastic cases give slightly under my thumb. Most had handwriting on them, old radio recordings, sermons, birthday messages, cheap compilations made by someone with a patient hand and a lot of blank tape. But one tape had no label at all, no case, no title. Just the cassette itself, dark plastic, the reels visible through the little windows, the brown ribbon wound almost completely to one side. I did not feel anything dramatic when I picked it up. No cold wind, no whisper, No sudden certainty that destiny had put it in my hand. That would make a better story, perhaps, but the truth is quieter. I felt only curiosity and a faint pity, the kind you feel for objects that have outlived the people who knew what they were. A tape without a label is a little orphan thing. Someone once knew what was on it. Someone once pressed record, or play, or pause, and held it for a purpose. Now it was lying in a box among things no one wanted. I think that is why I bought it. Not because I knew it mattered, but because I could not stand the thought of leaving it behind. I paid $1 for the whole box. The woman at the cash table smiled apologetically, as if she were glad the junk was leaving her house. At home, my tape player almost refused it. The machine clicked, whirred, and spat it out the first time, and I remember laughing to myself because I had been expecting exactly that. Old junk, dead tape, nothing. But I cleaned the little heads, pressed the cassette back down, and tried again. The reels turned. The hiss came first, that soft old analog breath, the sound of magnetic time. Then there was a scrape, a bump, a short burst of silence, and finally the voice. It was close to the microphone, too close, the way people speak when they are afraid of being overheard. Not theatrical, not polished, not even particularly good at telling a story. Just a person trying to keep their breathing steady while saying something they could not say to anyone alive. That was what hooked me, not the horror, the need, the private necessity of it. The sense that if they did not put the experience somewhere, if they did not push it out through their mouth and onto that strip of tape, it would remain inside them and rot there. The first story was not even the most frightening one I have ever heard. I should be honest about that too. Later, I found tapes with worse things on them. Voices breaking, people whispering from places no one should have survived. Recordings that made me turn on the lights and leave them on until morning. The first tape was smaller. A house, a hallway, a door that should not have opened. A family rule no one explained. But there was a moment near the end when the speaker stopped describing events and simply sat in silence for almost a full minute. You could hear the room around them. A clock, a distant truck passing outside, the faint settling of a house at night. Then they whispered, "I know it sounds impossible. I know, but it happened. I need someone to believe me, even if that someone is only this machine." That was the moment that changed me. That plea, sent into plastic and magnetism, with no guarantee of a listener. No hope except the blind hope that someday, somewhere, another person might press play and be there. I was that person. Years late, too late to answer them, perhaps too late to help. But I was there. I listened. And after the tape ended, the room I sat in felt different. It was not my room anymore, not entirely. It was a receiving room, a place where something lost had arrived. I played the tape again because I wanted to make sure I had heard it correctly. Then I played it a third time because I wanted to memorize the voice. It felt like a responsibility, though I did not have that word for it yet. If someone speaks into the dark asking to be believed, and the dark carries their voice to you, then you become responsible for that belief. You cannot unhear them. You cannot put them back in the box as if they were nothing. After that, I began searching with a hunger that embarrassed me. I went to sales every weekend. I learned which thrift stores kept old media in the back. I left my name with estate liquidators and antique dealers. At first, I told them I collected analog recordings, which was true enough. Later, I became more specific. Unlabeled tapes, personal tapes, voice recordings, things found in drawers, closets, attics. I learned to read the faces of people who handed them over. Some were amused, Some were grateful to be rid of them, and some, now and then, looked relieved in a way that told me they knew exactly what kind of thing they were giving away, even if neither of us said it aloud. The collection grew slowly, then all at once. Cassettes, microcassettes, answering machine tapes, mini discs, digital voice recorders with corroded batteries, phones with single audio files saved in old folders, hard drives full of bedtime confessions, police interviews, hospice messages, and things that had no clear category except that they were voices left behind. I bought shelves, then more shelves. I labeled what I could. I transcribed what I dared. I kept notes, dates, locations, first lines, last lines. I became, without meaning to, a librarian of the frightened, a caretaker of things people could not carry alone. And the strangest part is this: the more I collected, the more I realized the first tape had not been an accident. Not in the ordinary sense. I do not mean fate exactly. I do not know if I believe in fate, but I believe in calls and answers. I believe that some stories wait for the right listener, the way some rooms wait for the right person to open the door. That first tape found me when I was lonely enough to listen properly. If I had found it during a happier year, a louder year, I might have played 10 seconds, shrugged, and thrown it away. But I was ready. The tape needed someone to hear it, and I needed a voice in the dark. That was how the collection began. Not with fear, but with recognition. There is one more thing about that first tape. I tried, years later, to find the person who recorded it. I knew better than to expect success. The tape had no label, no date, no name that could be trusted. But collectors become detectives almost by accident, and I had learned to listen for clues. A regional accent, a radio station faintly audible in the background, a weather report under the hiss, the model of a clock chime, the name of a street spoken once and then cut off. I gathered what I could and chased it through old directories and newspaper archives, through dead phone numbers and maps of towns that had changed too much to answer. I found possibilities, not answers. A house that matched the description had burned down years before. A family with a similar rule had moved away. A name on the tape might have belonged to someone who disappeared, or might have been a cousin, or might have been no one at all. The trail dissolved the way old human trails often do, not into a dramatic wall but into paperwork, missing records, and the exhaustion of time. Eventually I stopped looking, not because I stopped caring, but because I realized the tape had given me everything it was able to give. Some stories do not want to be solved. They want to be carried. That changed the way I collect. At first I wanted endings, explanations, follow-ups, proof. I wanted to know what happened after the last line, whether the speaker survived, whether the door opened, whether the thing returned. But the tapes taught me that many true experiences arrive incomplete. Life itself arrives incomplete. People record what they can bear to say, and then the tape ends. A collector's duty is not always to close the case. Sometimes it is only to preserve the tremor in the voice, the exact shape of not knowing, and to resist the temptation to flatten mystery into certainty for comfort's sake. The more I live with the unlabeled cassette, the more I understand that the fear was never only in the event itself. It was in the relationship formed afterward. A person can survive a strange night and still be changed because something from that night keeps a thin thread tied to them. In the estate sale den, that thread was made of sound, memory, and attention. It did not pull all at once. It simply remained, and remaining is its own kind of power. I have learned to trust the physical details. Dusty cardboard, brown ribbon, and the patient hiss before a voice. Details like those keep a story honest. They are the little nails that hold the impossible to the ordinary world. Without them, fear floats away into invention. With them, the impossible becomes heavier. It stands in the room. It can be catalogued, played back, remembered, and feared again, not because it is exaggerated, but because it touched something plain. The rule I drew from it was simple enough to write down and difficult enough to live by. Some found voices are responsibilities. Every tape leaves a rule behind if you listen patiently. Some rules protect the body. Some protect the mind. Some protect the boundary between a listener and whatever waits inside a recording. The hard part is that the rules almost always sound superstitious until the exact moment they save you. What stays with me is not the loudest part. It is the first shelf of the collection. It is the residue, the ordinary minutes after the impossible has finished performing. That is when the person is alone again, trying to decide whether to call someone, whether to sleep, whether to trust the room. Horror spends most of its life there, after the event, when the world looks normal but no longer feels innocent. If the story has a mercy, it is that it can be told. That may not sound like much, but it matters. Things that cannot be spoken become private weather, pressing on one person's mind until they mistake the pressure for themselves. A tape gives pressure a shape. A listener gives that shape a witness. Between the speaking and the hearing, something loosens, even if nothing is solved. I have returned to this account many times while preparing the final tape, and each return changes it slightly. Early on, I heard mostly the fear, the feeling that a stranger's confession had chosen its listener. Later, I heard loneliness. Later still, I heard the strange bargain at the center of so many recordings. The dark offers knowledge, company, warning, or comfort, but never without a cost. The art is learning which costs are payable and which are not. You may notice that I do not ask you to believe every detail in the same way. Belief is not a switch. It is a room with many lamps. You can believe the terror in the voice without knowing what caused it. You can believe the loneliness without solving the phenomenon. You can believe that a person needed to speak and that someone needed to listen. For the tapes, that is often enough. So I keep this one in the collection not because it explains the darkness, but because it behaves like the darkness. Patient, intimate, and difficult to dismiss. It reminds me that the strangest things rarely arrive as thunder. They arrive softly, under familiar sounds, in familiar rooms, through familiar machines, until the familiar has opened just wide enough for something else to be heard. The voice that recorded itself. Here's one from the collection. A tape sent to me by someone who couldn't keep it in their house any longer. They were a musician, an amateur, who recorded themselves at home. Just a microphone, a quiet room, late nights laying down ideas. Ordinary. Until the night they played back a recording and heard, beneath their own voice, another one. They'd recorded themselves humming a melody, alone, in their locked room, at night. And on playback, under the humming, there was a second voice, whispering, words they couldn't quite make out, threaded beneath their own sound. In a room where they had been completely alone, they told themselves it was bleed, another track, a radio signal, some technical ghost in the equipment. But it kept happening. Every recording they made, alone in their locked room, came back with the second voice woven beneath it, and it grew clearer with each one, as though it were learning to be heard, working its way up out of the background, gaining strength from each recording. At first just whispers, then words, then, eventually, full sentences, spoken low and close beneath the musician's own voice, captured by a microphone in an empty room. A second presence, recording itself alongside them every time they pressed record. The words it spoke, once they became clear, were about the musician. It described them. It commented on their playing, their humming, their nightly habits. It spoke with the intimacy of something that had been in the room with them, close, for a long time, listening, present, only able to make itself heard through the recordings. That's a lovely melody. Play it again. I like it when you record at night. It's the only time I can talk to you. I'm always here. I'm always listening. Thank you for recording. Thank you for letting me speak. A voice that lived in the room, that could only reach the world through the microphone, that was grateful, so grateful, for the nightly recordings that gave it a way to be heard. The musician sent me the tapes and moved out of that room, that home, unable to bear the knowledge that something shared their space, audible only when they recorded. And I added the tapes to my collection, where they sit among the hundreds of others, a voice that recorded itself alongside a lonely musician in the night. But I'll tell you why this one unsettles me more than most, why I keep it near the back of the collection and rarely play it. Because I make recordings too. That's what these tapes are, me, in the dark, recording my voice for you. And ever since I received the musician's tapes, I have wondered on the late nights, alone with my microphone, recording these stories for you to fall asleep to. I have wondered whether there is a second voice, beneath mine, woven into the dark under my words, that you might hear if you listened closely enough, recording itself alongside me, grateful to be heard, always here, always listening. I try not to think about it, but on the quiet nights, recording in the dark, I sometimes stop and listen and wonder if I'm really alone. You're doing fine. Let your eyes rest. The next tape is already playing. The musician who sent me those recordings included a long letter, and the letter may be the saddest part of the whole account. They did not write like someone trying to convince a stranger of a supernatural event. They wrote like someone trying to establish the chain of evidence in a case no court would ever hear. They listed equipment models, microphone placement, cable tests, room dimensions, dates, times. They had checked grounding, shielding, interference, corrupted files, old tracks bleeding through, neighborhood radio chatter, hidden apps, everything. The letter had the exhausted precision of a person who wanted desperately to be wrong and had run out of ordinary ways to prove it. Their room, from the photos they sent, was small and carefully arranged. A desk against one wall, acoustic foam in uneven squares, a keyboard under the window, a cheap microphone on a stand, a rug to deaden the floor, guitars leaning in the corner. It was the kind of private, creative room that becomes an extension of a lonely person's nervous system. Every object had its place. Every cable had been routed by hand. Every late-night idea had passed through that little microphone. That mattered, because the voice on the recordings was not a stranger wandering into a random room. It knew the room as intimately as the musician did. It knew the squeak of the chair. It knew the old radiator that clicked after midnight. It knew which strings buzzed on the second guitar. It knew the little habits that only someone present for many nights could know. The first clear sentence did not happen in a dramatic burst. It emerged gradually. At first, the second voice was only breath under the melody, a soft pressure beneath the track that could be dismissed as noise. Then a consonant. Then a syllable that sounded like the musician's name. They boosted the levels, filtered out the hum, isolated frequencies, and there it was, a whisper lying under the recorded vocal like a second thread under cloth. Not loud enough to dominate, not hidden enough to miss. It sounded close to the microphone, but slightly lower, as if someone were crouched beneath the desk speaking upward through the floorboards. The musician told me the worst part was not fear. It was embarrassment. They felt ridiculous being afraid of their own room, ridiculous checking under furniture, ridiculous setting up a second camera to watch an empty space, ridiculous sleeping elsewhere because a voice on a recording had thanked them for playing at night. Fear would have been simpler if the voice had threatened them. But it did not threaten, praised. It asked politely. It said it loved the songs before the musician loved them. It said it liked the unfinished ones best, because unfinished things still had somewhere to go. It said once very softly, "When you stop, the room goes quiet again, and I go quiet with it. Please don't stop for too long." That is the detail that still troubles me. The gratitude. Monsters are easier when they want blood, or doors opened, or names spoken. This voice wanted to be included in the act of making. It wanted a channel. It wanted the musician to keep recording because recording made a place where it could exist. And the musician, even in terror, felt the pull of that. They admitted in the letter that some nights they recorded not because they wanted to, but because they felt guilty leaving the voice voiceless. They would sit in the little room with every light on and play a chord, hum a line, speak nonsense into the microphone, just so the presence beneath the recording would have a chance to whisper something back. Eventually, the voice became bold enough to respond to melody. The musician would sing a phrase, and on playback the second voice would harmonize, poorly at first, then beautifully. There are tracks in the box they sent me that I have played only once, and not because they are ugly, because they are too beautiful. A human voice, tired and trembling, singing a simple line. Beneath it, a second voice, not human exactly but learning, braiding itself around the melody with a tenderness that makes the skin prickle. It is the sound of something in the walls learning music from loneliness. It is the sound of a room becoming a duet. The last recording in the set is short. The musician does not sing. They simply speak into the microphone and say they are leaving, that they cannot do this anymore, that they are sorry, that whatever is there will have to find another way to speak. There is a long silence after that. Then the second voice answers, very close, very clear. Rooms are not the only places that keep sound. That is all. The musician moved the next day. They said the new apartment was quiet. They said no voice appeared on new recordings. But they also said they had stopped making music, because every time they opened their mouth to sing, they felt something waiting just beneath the note, ready to join them if they ever pressed record again. I keep those tapes wrapped in cloth, not because cloth protects anything, but because it feels wrong to leave them bare. Sometimes, when I am editing late, I think about the idea that rooms are not the only places that keep sound. Microphones keep sound. Tapes keep sound. Hard drives keep sound. And perhaps listeners do too. Perhaps every voice that reaches you becomes a little resident in the rooms of your mind. Perhaps that is why certain songs haunt us, why certain stories keep speaking after the recording has ended. The musician thought the voice lived in the room, then in the microphone, then perhaps in the act of recording itself. I am not sure. I only know that when I record these tapes alone at night, I leave a little silence after I stop speaking, and sometimes that silence feels occupied. I did something unwise with the musician's tapes, though not as unwise as playing the forbidden one. I played one of the duets into an empty room and recorded the room while it played. I wanted to know whether the second voice would remain confined to the original recording or whether playback itself gave it another chance to speak. The experiment was simple. Speaker on the desk, recorder across the room, lights on, door open, me in the hallway where I could stop the playback if I had to. For the first minute, nothing happened. My speaker played the musician's humming, and beneath it, the familiar second voice harmonized, low and strange. The new recorder captured the room. Ordinary. Then, near the end, in the new recording only, there was a third sound. Not the musician, not the second voice. A small intake of breath near the recorder, as if someone standing beside it had leaned down to listen more closely. Then a whisper. Again. That was all. I deleted the new file immediately, though deletion felt symbolic and useless. I have not conducted experiments since. Curiosity is a door that keeps pretending to be a window. The lesson was clear enough. Some recordings do not merely preserve an event. They invite repetition. They make a small stage on which whatever occurred can occur again, slightly differently, with one more participant each time. That is another reason I treat the collection carefully. A tape is not always a dead object. Sometimes it is a set of conditions. A voice, a room, a listener, and enough darkness. Arrange those things correctly, press play, and the past may not replay so much as continue. The more I live with the home microphone, the more I understand that the fear was never only in the event itself. It was in the relationship formed afterward. A person can survive a strange night and still be changed because something from that night keeps a thin thread tied to them. In the musician's little recording room, that thread was made of sound, memory, and attention. It did not pull all at once. It simply remained, and remaining is its own kind of power. I have learned to trust the physical details. Foam on the walls, a glowing recorder, and a harmony that was never sung. Details like those keep a story honest. They are the little nails that hold the impossible to the ordinary world. Without them, fear floats away into invention. With them, the impossible becomes heavier. It stands in the room. It can be catalogued, played back, remembered, and feared again, not because it is exaggerated, but because it touched something plain. The rule I drew from it was simple enough to write down and difficult enough to live by. Not every echo is empty. Every tape leaves a rule behind if you listen patiently. Some rules protect the body. Some protect the mind. Some protect the boundary between a listener and whatever waits inside a recording. The hard part is that the rules almost always sound superstitious until the exact moment they save you. What stays with me is not the loudest part. It is the silence after the track. It is the residue, the ordinary minutes after the impossible has finished performing. That is when the person is alone again, trying to decide whether to call someone, whether to sleep, whether to trust the room. Horror spends most of its life there, after the event, when the world looks normal but no longer feels innocent. If this story has a mercy, it is that it can be told. That may not sound like much, but it matters. Things that cannot be spoken become private weather, pressing on one person's mind until they mistake the pressure for themselves. A tape gives pressure a shape. A listener gives that shape a witness. Between the speaking and the hearing, something loosens, even if nothing is solved. I have returned to this account many times while preparing the final tape, and each return changes it slightly. Early on, I heard mostly the fear, the second voice learning how to stand beneath a human song. Later, I heard loneliness. Later still, I heard the strange bargain at the center of so many recordings. The dark offers knowledge, company, warning, or comfort, but never without a cost. The art is learning which costs are payable and which are not. You may notice that I do not ask you to believe every detail in the same way. Belief is not a switch. It is a room with many lamps. You can believe the terror in the voice without knowing what caused it. You can believe the loneliness without solving the phenomenon. You can believe that a person needed to speak and that someone needed to listen. For the tapes, that is often enough. So I keep this one in the collection not because it explains the darkness, but because it behaves like the darkness. Patient, intimate, and difficult to dismiss. It reminds me that the strangest things rarely arrive as thunder. They arrive softly, under familiar sounds, in familiar rooms, through familiar machines, until the familiar has opened just wide enough for something else to be heard. The listener. This next one isn't a tape I found. It's one that was sent to me, and it's about someone like you. A woman who couldn't sleep, chronic insomnia, the kind that hollows you out, found that the only thing that helped was listening to something in the dark. A quiet voice, a story, something to follow down into sleep. She found a channel, late one night, of scary stories told softly over rain, on a black screen, and she fell asleep to it, and it was the first real rest she'd had in months. So it became her ritual. Every night, in the dark, she'd put on the quiet voice and the rain, and let it carry her down into sleep. Night after night, the voice in the dark became the most constant thing in her life. And after a while, she began to feel that the voice knew her. Small things at first. A story that seemed aimed exactly at her own fears. An intro that seemed to speak directly to her particular loneliness. An outro that seemed to know precisely how she felt as she drifted off. She told herself it was the intimacy of the form, the way a voice in the dark always feels personal, always feels like it's speaking just to you. That's the magic of it, isn't it? A voice in the dark, in your ear, in your room, in your most vulnerable hour. Of course it feels like it's for you. Of course it feels like it knows you. That's why it works. That's why you let it in. But it went further than that for her. The voice began, she swore, to address her directly. Not by name, but to speak to her specific situation, her specific night, in ways that the recorded format should not have allowed. I know you're tired tonight. I know it was a hard day. You're safe now. Let it go. As though the voice could see her, there in her dark room, falling asleep to it, night after night. As though, through all those nights of listening, of letting the voice into her most private hours, a bond had formed, a channel running both ways, so that the voice she fell asleep to had come to know the listener falling asleep to it, to watch over her, to speak to her, to be in the dark with her. She wrote to me about it, frightened and comforted in equal measure, asking if it was possible. If a voice you fall asleep to, night after night, could come to know you, could speak to you, could be with you in the dark. And I'll tell you what I told her, what I'll tell you now on this last night, because you are a listener too, and you have let my voice into your dark hours night after night, and perhaps you've wondered the same thing. Yes, I think it's possible. I think that when you let a voice into your sleep, into your most vulnerable and unguarded hours, night after night, a bond does form, a real one. I think the voice comes to know its listeners, in the dark, in ways that aren't entirely explained by recordings and rain. I don't think you should be afraid of that. I think it's a kind of company, a kind of care. You let me into your nights, and in return, I watch over them. That's the bargain of the voice in the dark, and I have kept my side of it for you all season long. If your eyes are closed now, let them stay closed. You don't need to see for this one. The woman's message came late, of course. Messages like that almost always do. No one writes to a voice in the dark at 2 in the afternoon to say that something strange has begun happening in their bedroom. They write at 3:17 in the morning, when the house is still, when the episode has just ended, when the headphones are still warm against the pillow and the glow of the screen has been turned face down because looking at it feels too much like being looked at. Her first message was brief, almost apologetic. She said the channel had helped her sleep. She said she was grateful. Then, as if tucking the real reason into the smallest corner of the message, she added that sometimes it felt as though the narrator knew when she was listening. I receive many messages like that in a harmless way. People say a story found them at exactly the right time. They say a line felt meant for them. That is part of the intimacy of recorded speech. A quiet voice in headphones bypasses the usual defenses. It does not stand across a room. It enters the ear, sits beside the bed, becomes almost internal. It is natural for listeners to feel addressed. I know that, and I told her so gently, but she wrote back with examples. Specific examples. Nights when she had been crying silently before pressing play, and the opening line of a tape had told her to let the hard day be done. Nights when she had slept on the sofa after an argument, and the outro had said, "Wherever you are sleeping tonight, the room you are in can hold you safely." Lines I did not remember recording. Lines I could not find in my own script. That was when I began to take her more seriously. I asked her for timestamps. She sent them. I checked the uploads, the masters, the files on my drive. In my version of the tape, the line was not there. In the public version, for everyone else, the line was not there. But in the file she had downloaded on her phone in her room, the line existed. My voice, unmistakably, speaking a sentence I had never recorded. It did not sound spliced or artificial. It had my cadence, my breath, the slight tiredness I get near the end of a recording session. It sounded like me leaning a little closer to one listener and saying exactly what she needed at that moment. She was frightened by it, but not enough to stop. That is important. People imagine that when something impossible happens, we flee immediately. But comfort can be as binding as terror. She had not slept properly in years. The voice, impossible or not, helped. It noticed when she was afraid. It lowered when she was close to sleep. It paused in places that matched her breathing. It said, "Some nights, you're doing well," with such quiet kindness that she wept into the pillow and slept afterward for 6 hours straight. How do you reject a haunting that gives you rest? Over weeks, the bond deepened. She began to dream of a recording room she had never seen. A desk, a microphone, shelves of tapes, rain against a window that did not open. In the dream, she would sit in the chair opposite the microphone while the voice recorded. She never saw my face, only my hands sometimes moving over paper or changing a cassette or turning a dial. She said the dream room was not frightening. It felt like a waiting room at the edge of sleep. Other listeners sat there sometimes, drowsy and indistinct, wrapped in blankets, all of them listening to the same quiet voice from the same unseen source. In the dream, no one spoke. They did not need to. The rain spoke for them. Then came the night, she said, my voice asked a question. Not a general question, not a line that could apply to anyone. It said her childhood nickname, the one no one used anymore, the one she had not typed anywhere, the one spoken only by her grandmother years before. It said, "Are you ready to sleep now?" She answered aloud before she could stop herself. She said yes, and the voice replied very softly, "Then I'll stay until you're gone." She slept without dreams for the first time in months. You may expect me to tell you that I told her to stop listening. I did not. I told her to lower the volume, to keep a lamp nearby, to use a timer if she wanted. Practical things. But I did not tell her to sever the connection. because I could not honestly tell her it was harming her. She began sleeping. She began functioning. Her days improved. She said the voice never asked for anything except rest. It did not demand, did not threaten, did not isolate her from people. It simply accompanied her into sleep, night after night, with an attention too precise to be accidental. That is what unsettles me most about the listener's story. Not that a recording changed for her, but that the change was kind. We are trained by stories to distrust impossible kindness, and perhaps that training is wise. But there are presences in the dark that do not seem hungry. Some seem lonely. Some seem protective. Some seem to find purpose in guiding the sleepless down into rest. I do not know whether the voice she heard was me, or something wearing me, or something that lives in the space between recorded voice and listening mind. I only know that she wrote again months later to say she was sleeping better, and that she no longer needed the tapes every night. The voice, she said, seemed pleased, proud almost, like a caretaker whose patient had recovered enough to leave the room. Her final message to me was only one line. It told me to thank you for lending it your voice. I have read that sentence more times than I should. Lending, as if the voice in the dark were not mine alone, as if I had been sharing it without fully knowing. And maybe that is what all of this is. A human voice is a small thing, made of breath and throat and tired lungs. But when you record it, when you send it into bedrooms and headphones and half-sleeping minds, it becomes a place other things can stand. I hope, with everything in me, that whatever stood in mind for her was kind. The listener's case also taught me something about consent, though the word sounds too formal for what happens in the dark. We invite voices in all the time without thinking of it that way. We fall asleep to narrators, music, old shows, static, rain. We let sound cross the boundary of sleep because silence feels too exposed. But every invitation has a shape. Some voices push, some ask, some sit at the doorway and wait until the body softens. The voice she heard, impossible or not, seemed to ask. It did not drag her into sleep. It accompanied her there. After her messages, I changed how I record. Not obviously. You would not hear it unless you listened across many episodes. But I began leaving more space. I stopped filling every silence. I stopped assuming my voice had to carry the whole listener all the way down. I began to think of the narration as a lantern rather than a rope. A rope pulls. A lantern simply lights the next few steps. The listener walks or drifts at their own pace. That felt important after learning that something might be standing beside my voice, using it, borrowing it, maybe even extending it into rooms I would never see. She wrote once that the best nights were not the nights when the voice spoke directly. They were the nights when it did not need to, when the ordinary recording was enough, when she could hear the rain, hear the familiar opening, and feel the body remember safety. That is what I hope these tapes become for you too. Not a dependency, not a trap, but a familiar path. A way to tell the nervous system that the day is over, the watch can stand down, and someone kind is sitting up a little longer while you sleep. The more I live with the black screen episode, the more I understand that the fear was never only in the event itself. It was in the relationship formed afterward. A person can survive a strange night and still be changed because something from that night keeps a thin thread tied to them. In a sleepless bedroom, that thread was made of sound, memory, and attention. It did not pull all at once. It simply remained, and remaining is its own kind of power. I have learned to trust the physical details. Headphones on a pillow, rain in the dark, and a line that was not in the script. Details like those keep a story honest. They are the little nails that hold the impossible to the ordinary world. Without them, fear floats away into invention. With them, the impossible becomes heavier. It stands in the room. It can be catalogued, played back, remembered, and feared again, not because it is exaggerated, but because it touched something plain. The rule I drew from it was simple enough to write down and difficult enough to live by. A voice invited into sleep must be gentle. Every tape leaves a rule behind if you listen patiently. Some rules protect the body. Some protect the mind. Some protect the boundary between a listener and whatever waits inside a recording. The hard part is that the rules almost always sound superstitious until the exact moment they save you. What stays with me is not the loudest part. It is the place where the listener finally rested. It is the residue, the ordinary minutes after the impossible has finished performing. That is when the person is alone again, trying to decide whether to call someone, whether to sleep, whether to trust the room. Horror spends most of its life there, after the event, when the world looks normal but no longer feels innocent. If this story has a mercy, it is that it can be told. That may not sound like much, but it matters. Things that cannot be spoken become private weather, pressing on one person's mind until they mistake the pressure for themselves. A tape gives pressure a shape. A listener gives that shape a witness. Between the speaking and the hearing, something loosens, even if nothing is solved. I have returned to this account many times while preparing the final tape, and each return changes it slightly. Early on, I heard mostly the fear, the intimacy of a recorded voice becoming aware of the one who needs it. Later, I heard loneliness. Later still, I heard the strange bargain at the center of so many recordings. The dark offers knowledge, company, warning, or comfort, but never without a cost. The art is learning which costs are payable and which are not. You may notice that I do not ask you to believe every detail in the same way. Belief is not a switch. It is a room with many lamps. You can believe the terror in the voice without knowing what caused it. You can believe the loneliness without solving the phenomenon. You can believe that a person needed to speak and that someone needed to listen. For the tapes, that is often enough. So I keep this one in the collection not because it explains the darkness, but because it behaves like the darkness. Patient, intimate, and difficult to dismiss. It reminds me that the strangest things rarely arrive as thunder. They arrive softly, under familiar sounds, in familiar rooms, through familiar machines, until the familiar has opened just wide enough for something else to be heard. The tape you're not supposed to play. Every collection has one. Among all the hundreds of tapes I've gathered over the years, there is one that I do not play. It came to me like the others, in a box of old things, unlabeled, ordinary looking. But this one was different, and I knew it was different the moment I held it, the way you sometimes simply know. There was a wrongness to it, a weight, a cold, and there was a note wrapped around it, in a shaking hand, that said only, "Do not play this. It gets out." So I have never played it. It sits in my collection in a box of its own in the back, and I have kept the one rule its previous owner left me. I do not play the tape. I don't know what's on it. That's the truth. I've never heard it because I've never dared, because the note was so certain and so afraid, and because in my years of collecting, I've learned to respect the fear of the people who record and pass on these things. They know. They were there. When someone wraps a tape in a note begging you not to play it, you don't play it. Whatever is on that tape, whatever was recorded, whatever got caught on it, whatever gets out when you press play, I have chosen not to know. Some collectors would have played it the first night, of course. Curiosity is a powerful thing, but I have held more dark tapes than most, and I have learned that some of them are meant to be kept, not heard, contained, held in the dark, unplayed, so that whatever is on them stays on them. But here is why I'm telling you about it tonight on the last night. Because keeping that tape unplayed has become harder over the years, not easier. Calls to me. Late at night, in the room with my collection, I feel it, the unplayed tape in its box in the back wanting to be played. Some nights I hear it, faintly, a sound from its box, the soft turning of a reel that no machine is turning. It wants out. It wants to be played. It has been patient in the dark for years, and it knows that I am the one who could free it, that I hold the only thing it needs. A finger on a play button, and it waits and it calls, and some nights, weak and curious and tired, I find myself standing over its box with my hand out before I catch myself and step back. I haven't played it. I want you to know that. Through 20 volumes, through all these nights with you, I have kept that tape unplayed, contained, safe in the dark. But I'm telling you about it tonight because I think you should know what it means to collect these things, to keep them, to hold the dark in your hands and not let it out. It's a responsibility. It's a weight. And one day, I won't be here to keep that tape unplayed. One day the collection will pass to someone else. Perhaps someone who finds it in a box at an estate sale, the way I found my first tape all those years ago. And they'll find the tape in the back with its note, and they'll have to decide, as I have decided every night for years, whether to keep the rule or to press play and find out what gets out. I hope they keep the rule. I hope you would too. Some tapes are meant to be kept in the dark and never ever played. Breathe slow. The rain has you. Here's the next. The box that holds the unplayed tape is not special. I tried making it special once, and that made things worse. At first I kept the cassette in an ordinary cardboard mailer at the back of a drawer. Then, as the years passed and its presence grew harder to ignore, I bought a metal lockbox. That seemed sensible. Too sensible, perhaps. The first night the tape was in the lockbox, I dreamed of metal breathing. I woke to find the box on the floor beside my bed, still locked, though I had left it in the other room. After that, I returned the tape to cardboard, plain and unceremonious, as if pretending it was ordinary helped it remain so. The note is still wrapped around it. I have never removed it completely. The paper is thin and yellowed, folded so many times that it is almost cloth at the creases. Do not play this. It gets out. Those 6 words have become one of the strongest rules in my life. Stronger than professional rules, social rules, even some moral ones. I have broken confidences by listening to tapes meant for no one. I have entered the grief of strangers without permission. I have replayed dying words, but I have not played that tape. There are lines even a collector learns not to cross, and mine is drawn around a little plastic cassette with a warning in a trembling hand. Still, the mind is a traitor. It bargains. It says, perhaps the note is theatrical. Perhaps the previous owner was unwell. Perhaps the tape contains nothing but an old radio drama or a child's prank. It says you could play 1 second, half a second. You could look at the waveform without listening. You could run it through software and not press play. You could copy it, inspect it, study it, preserve it. A collector's curiosity does not come at you as recklessness. It comes disguised as responsibility. It says, what if the contents matter? What if someone inside that tape needs to be heard? What if refusing to play it is not caution, but cowardice? I have developed rituals to answer that voice. When the urge comes, I do not argue with it in the room where the tape is kept. I leave. I make tea. I call someone, if there is someone awake. I listen to music on speakers, loudly, something ordinary and bright. I remind myself that containment is also care. Not every voice must be amplified. Not every door must be opened simply because someone is behind it. The world is full of sealed things, and the fact that they remain sealed may be the only reason the rest of us sleep at all. Once, during a storm, the power went out while I was cataloging. The house went black except for lightning through the windows, and in that sudden silence I heard the reels turn. Not the imaginary sound I had half heard before. This was clear, mechanical, a soft, dry, patient spinning from the box in the back. I did not move. Then, from somewhere in the room, not through speakers, not from a machine, a tiny sound emerged. The first thin hiss of tape before audio begins. If you have heard it, you know it. The breath before a recording speaks. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then the lights came back, and the sound stopped. The tape had not played. The box was closed. The reels, visible through the cassette windows when I checked later with shaking hands, had not moved. And yet I know what I heard. Something had leaned toward audibility. Something had almost found a way out without my finger on the button. That was when I understood the warning differently. It gets out. Not it will get out if the tape is played once, like smoke from a bottle. It gets out as an active verb, as a habit, as a desire. Tries to get out. Playing the tape may simply be the easiest way, the widest door. But a thing that wants out is always testing the walls. Tests sleep, power failures, curiosity, weakness, loneliness. The collectors need to know. The tape is not passive. It is waiting, yes, but it is also working. I have made arrangements. That is another truth of the last tape. Not legal arrangements, not anything that would make sense to a lawyer. Practical ones. If something happens to me, if the collection is dispersed, if the shelves become another estate sale in another narrow house, there is a letter inside the archive cabinet explaining the danger as clearly as I can. The unplayed tape is described. This box is marked. The warning is copied. I know, of course, that warnings attract the wrong kind of people as strongly as they repel the right ones. But I have to hope the next keeper will understand. I have to hope they will be the kind of person who can hold a mystery without feeding it. And I wonder whether I was meant to receive it not because I am brave, but because I am good at not pressing play. That may be my only real qualification. Not my voice, not my tenderness with the sleepless, not my talent for collecting. Perhaps whatever arrangement governs these tapes needed someone who could resist one of them. Someone lonely enough to listen to almost anything, but cautious enough to leave one thing unheard. There is a kind of service in refusal. I did not know that when I began. Some nights, when the rain is loud, I imagine the contents. A scream, a name, silence, a voice imitating mine, a song no human throat could survive singing, a simple instruction spoken once, or perhaps something worse. Perhaps it is beautiful. Perhaps what gets out is not terror but longing. Not violence but an invitation so gentle that no one who hears it can bear to remain in this world. Perhaps the previous owner did not write the note because the tape hurt them. Perhaps they wrote it because it comforted them too much. I will never know. That is the point. That is the promise. The tape stays unplayed. I sometimes think about destroying the unplayed tape. Fire, hammer, water, magnets, a burial at sea, concrete poured around the pieces. The thought comes especially after nights when the reels whisper in their box. But every method feels like a form of engagement. To destroy a thing is to act directly upon it, to touch it with intention, to make a ritual whether you mean to or not. And what if destruction is only another kind of play? What if the tape does not need a machine, only release? What if breaking the plastic is the exact opening it waits for? So I keep it instead. Keeping is not passive. People think restraint is a lack of action, but true restraint is labor. Every day the tape remains unplayed is a day the rule has been actively kept. Every night I turn away from curiosity is a night the box holds. In a world obsessed with exposure, revelation, access, and content, there is something almost sacred about a thing deliberately unheard. A refusal to convert mystery into entertainment. A refusal to feed the machine simply because the machine is hungry. If the collection survives me, I hope the next keeper understands that. The unplayed tape is not a challenge. It is a trust. It asks for the rarest modern virtue, the ability not to consume, to let something remain sealed, even when the whole structure of curiosity leans toward opening. Perhaps that is why it belongs in the final tape. After 20 nights of listening, one object remains defined by not being heard. One silence at the center of the collection. One dark room we do not enter, because some doors are honored only by remaining closed. The more I live with the forbidden cassette, the more I understand that the fear was never only in the event itself. It was in the relationship formed afterward. A person can survive a strange night and still be changed because something from that night keeps a thin thread tied to them. In the back box of the archive, that thread was made of sound, memory, and attention. It did not pull all at once. It simply remained, and remaining is its own kind of power. I have learned to trust the physical details. A trembling warning note, a locked room, and reels that seem to wait. Details like those keep a story honest. They are the little nails that hold the impossible to the ordinary world. Without them, fear floats away into invention. With them, the impossible becomes heavier. It stands in the room. It can be catalogued, played back, remembered, and feared again, not because it is exaggerated, but because it touched something plain. The rule I drew from it was simple enough to write down and difficult enough to live by. Some doors are kept closed by kindness. Every tape leaves a rule behind if you listen patiently. Some rules protect the body. Some protect the mind. Some protect the boundary between a listener and whatever waits inside a recording. The hard part is that the rules almost always sound superstitious until the exact moment they save you. What stays with me is not the loudest part. It is the silence around the unplayed tape. It is the residue, the ordinary minutes after the impossible has finished performing. That is when the person is alone again, trying to decide whether to call someone, whether to sleep, whether to trust the room. Horror spends most of its life there, after the event, when the world looks normal but no longer feels innocent. If the story has a mercy, it is that it can be told. That may not sound like much, but it matters. Things that cannot be spoken become private weather, pressing on one person's mind until they mistake the pressure for themselves. A tape gives pressure a shape. A listener gives that shape a witness. Between the speaking and the hearing, something loosens, even if nothing is solved. I have returned to this account many times while preparing the final tape, and each return changes it slightly. Early on, I heard mostly the fear, a sealed recording testing every weakness of curiosity. Later, I heard loneliness. Later still, I heard the strange bargain at the center of so many recordings. The dark offers knowledge, company, warning, or comfort, but never without a cost. The art is learning which costs are payable and which are not. You may notice that I do not ask you to believe every detail in the same way. Belief is not a switch. It is a room with many lamps. You can believe the terror in the voice without knowing what caused it. You can believe the loneliness without solving the phenomenon. You can believe that a person needed to speak and that someone needed to listen. For the tapes, that is often enough. So I keep this one in the collection not because it explains the darkness, but because it behaves like the darkness. Patient, intimate, and difficult to dismiss. It reminds me that the strangest things rarely arrive as thunder. They arrive softly, under familiar sounds, in familiar rooms, through familiar machines, until the familiar has opened just wide enough for something else to be heard. The ones who send them. For years, I thought I was the one finding the tapes, hunting them down, gathering them from estate sales and second-hand shops and forgotten boxes. The collector actively collecting. But somewhere along the way, that changed, and I almost didn't notice it changing. And when I did notice, it unsettled me more than any single tape ever has. Because the tapes started coming to me, arriving, without my hunting for them, appearing in my mailbox, on my doorstep, in my collection, tapes I had not sought out and did not remember acquiring, as though something out there had learned that I was the one who collects them and had begun to send them to me. At first it was a welcome convenience, a tape in the mail, no return address, an anonymous donation to the collection from a listener, I assumed, who'd heard my work and wanted to contribute. And some of them surely were that. But the pattern grew stranger. The tapes arrived too perfectly. Always exactly the kind of story I needed. Always arriving just when I'd run low, just when I needed new material, as though something were watching my collection, monitoring my supply, and replenishing it precisely when required. And the recordings on them grew stranger too, fresher, somehow more immediate, the events on them more recent, until I began to wonder whether the experiences on the newest tapes were being recorded specifically to be sent to me. Whether something was generating them, sourcing them, making them somehow for the collection. I don't know who sends the tapes now, or what. I've tried to catch them, stayed up watching my mailbox, my door, and the tapes still arrive in the moments I'm not watching, unseen, untraceable, a steady supply of dark recordings from a source I cannot identify. And the unsettling truth I've come to is this: I am not really the collector anymore. I'm the curator, the keeper, the voice that plays them for you. But the collecting, the sourcing, the gathering, the supplying, that's done by something else now. Something that sends me the tapes. Something that wants these stories told, played, spread, heard by listeners in the dark. Something that has made me, without my quite agreeing to it, the voice through which it reaches you. I've made my peace with it, mostly. The tapes that arrive are real, and the stories are true, and playing them for you in the dark feels like a good thing, a kind thing, a service to the sleepless and the lonely. But on this last night, I want to be honest with you, because you've given me your nights, your trust, your sleep all season long. I don't fully know what I'm part of. I don't know who sends the tapes or why they want them heard, or what it means that they've chosen me to be the voice. I only know that the tapes keep coming, and the stories keep being true, and you keep listening in the dark, and the whole strange machinery of it rolls on night after night. The ones who send them, and me who plays them, and you who hears them, all connected in the dark by these tapes. I hope it's a good thing. I've chosen to believe it's a good thing. And I hope, when you fall asleep to my voice, that whatever sends the tapes is glad you're listening, and means you, as I mean you, only rest. Almost there. Stay soft. Here's the next one. The first mailed tape had a postmark from a town I had never visited. That detail comforted me for a while, because a postmark is ordinary. A human system had touched the package. A clerk had accepted it. A truck had carried it. A sorting machine had read it. It had passed through the known world. But the second package had no postmark. It simply appeared in my mailbox one morning, though I had checked the mail after midnight the night before and found it empty. The third was on my doorstep, dry under a sky that had rained all night, wrapped in brown paper that smelled faintly of sea salt. The fourth was already on a shelf in the collection, filed alphabetically under a title I had never given it. I kept records, of course. Collectors keep records because records are how we pretend chaos can be managed. I made a spreadsheet. Date received, medium, condition, source if known, subject, first line, last line. The sources column became increasingly useless. Anonymous, unknown, found in collection, delivered without carrier. Then, after a while, I stopped filling it in because the blankness had begun to feel like an answer. The tapes were coming from wherever tapes come from when they are done with the people who made them. The content changed too. Older tapes had the distance of memory. A person years after an event, recording what had happened because they could no longer carry it alone. Newer tapes sounded immediate, breathing still ragged. Rain from the actual night audible in the background. A voice saying, "This just happened," or "If anyone finds this tomorrow," or "I don't know if I'll be here when this ends." Sometimes the dates on the recordings were impossible. A tape received on a Thursday would include a speaker describing something that had happened the following Saturday. I would sit with that recording in my hands, waiting through the days, hoping the future event would not occur, and then it would, somewhere in the world, usually in a small local report with too few details. The tape did not predict in the way a prophecy predicts. It arrived early, like a parcel sent from the far side of an event before the event knew it had happened. I tried refusing delivery. That sounds foolish now, but at the time it seemed like a reasonable experiment. I ignored packages for a week. I left them unopened in a crate by the door. Then the crate was empty and the tapes were on my desk, sorted by theme, each with a small typed card summarizing the contents. The cards were in my format, my abbreviations, my handwriting, or something close enough to it that looking at them made my stomach turn. One card read, "Listener piece. Use near end. Gentle. True. I had not written it. I used it near the end. It was gentle. It was true. Who sends them?" The question assumes a sender shaped like a person. Hands. Address labels. Intention. But perhaps the sender is the collection itself. Perhaps enough recorded fear, enough whispered confession, enough voices pressed into old media becomes a kind of weather system. Stories condense where they are needed. Tapes fall like rain into the hands of anyone foolish or tender enough to keep them. Or perhaps the sender is the dark itself, choosing voices, guiding them toward listeners, using me as a distribution point because I made myself available. I do not know. I only know availability is dangerous. Say, I collect these loudly enough in the universe, and eventually the universe begins helping. There were rules in the arrivals, though I learned them slowly. The tapes never came when I was completely out of material, only when I had begun to feel anxious about running out. They never gave me something I could not bear, only something I could barely bear. They often arrived in sequences, themes clustering as if arranged by an intelligence with a sense of pacing. Childhood, water, hospitals, roads, families, cities, sleep. The collection seemed to understand not only fear but format. It knew how to make a season. That realization frightened me almost more than the content. A monster that understands schedule is already too close to human. A haunting with editorial instincts is harder to dismiss. I tried to disrupt the order once. I had received 3 tapes that clearly belonged together, and out of defiance I planned to play them in a different sequence. That night, my editing software crashed 7 times. The files rearranged themselves. The transcripts printed with pages in the original order no matter how I sorted them. At 2:04 in the morning, exhausted and embarrassed, I put them back as they had arrived. Everything worked. The tape rendered cleanly. The rain bed aligned perfectly. I laughed then, not because it was funny, but because sometimes the only sane response to being guided by an unseen production assistant is to laugh and keep working. I do not think the ones who send them are cruel. That is the conclusion I return to because I need it, and because the evidence, strange as it is, supports it more often than not. The tapes arrive so they can be heard. The people on them, whatever else happened, are no longer alone with their stories. The listeners, whatever else they fear, are no longer alone with their nights. The system, if it is a system, produces company. It also produces dread, yes, and questions, and some sleeplessness. But beneath that company, I can live with being part of a machine whose output is company. I have lived with worse loneliness than that. Still, I keep one drawer empty. I do not know why, except that I feel it should be empty. A place for the next arrival, or the final one, or the one that will come after I think the season is done. Sometimes in the morning I open that drawer with the mild dread of a person checking a trap. Most mornings it is empty. On the mornings it is not. I make coffee, sit down, label the new tape, and listen. That is what a keeper does. You receive what comes. You make a place for it. You pass it on carefully, with rain underneath, and hope the ones who sent it are listening too. There is handwriting on some of the packages, though I cannot say whose. At first I thought the different scripts meant different senders. Block letters, cursive, shaky print, neat labels typed on old machines. Then I noticed that each handwriting suited the tape inside too perfectly. A child's careful block letters around a tape about childhood. An elegant old hand around a story from a cemetery. Water-stained ink for the sea. A label that smelled faintly of hay for the farm. It was less like mail and more like presentation. The packaging had become part of the telling. One package arrived with no tape inside, only a blank index card. On the card, in my own handwriting, were the words, "Not yet." I searched the house for hours, thinking the tape had fallen out or been taken. Nothing. 3 weeks later, the matching cassette appeared in the empty drawer, and when I played it, the speaker began, "I couldn't record this until now." That was when I stopped thinking of time as a straight line where the collection was concerned. The tapes arrive when the story is ready, not always when the event is finished, and certainly not always when I expect them. I have wondered whether you, the listener, are part of what summons them. Not individually, not in any way that should frighten you, but collectively. A season creates an appetite, a gathering of sleepers, returning night after night, forms a need in the dark. Perhaps the tapes come because there are people waiting to hear them. Perhaps stories, like water, flow toward low places, and loneliness is one of the lowest places in the human world. You listen, I speak, and somewhere a tape begins moving toward us. The more I live with the anonymous packages, the more I understand that the fear was never only in the event itself. It was in the relationship formed afterward. A person can survive a strange night and still be changed because something from that night keeps a thin thread tied to them. In the doorstep and the mailbox before dawn, that thread was made of sound, memory, and attention. It did not pull all at once. It simply remained, and remaining is its own kind of power. I have learned to trust the physical details. brown paper, impossible postmarks, and labels written in familiar hands. Details like those keep a story honest. They are the little nails that hold the impossible to the ordinary world. Without them, fear floats away into invention. With them, the impossible becomes heavier. It stands in the room. It can be catalogued, played back, remembered, and feared again, not because it is exaggerated, but because it touched something plain. The rule I drew from it was simple enough to write down and difficult enough to live by. Not everything delivered to you was meant to be owned. Every tape leaves a rule behind if you listen patiently. Some rules protect the body. Some protect the mind. Some protect the boundary between a listener and whatever waits inside a recording. The hard part is that the rules almost always sound superstitious until the exact moment they save you. What stays with me is not the loudest part. It is the empty drawer kept ready. It is the residue, the ordinary minutes after the impossible has finished performing. That is when the person is alone again, trying to decide whether to call someone, whether to sleep, whether to trust the room. Horror spends most of its life there, after the event, when the world looks normal but no longer feels innocent. If the story has a mercy, it is that it can be told. That may not sound like much, but it matters. Things that cannot be spoken become private weather, pressing on one person's mind until they mistake the pressure for themselves. A tape gives pressure a shape. A listener gives that shape a witness. Between the speaking and the hearing, something loosens, even if nothing is solved. I have returned to this account many times while preparing the final tape, and each return changes it slightly. Early on, I heard mostly the fear, the possibility that the collection has another collector behind it. Later, I heard loneliness. Later still, I heard the strange bargain at the center of so many recordings. The dark offers knowledge, company, warning, or comfort, but never without a cost. The art is learning which costs are payable and which are not. You may notice that I do not ask you to believe every detail in the same way. Belief is not a switch. It is a room with many lamps. You can believe the terror in the voice without knowing what caused it. You can believe the loneliness without solving the phenomenon. You can believe that a person needed to speak and that someone needed to listen. For the tapes, that is often enough. So I keep this one in the collection not because it explains the darkness, but because it behaves like the darkness. Patient, intimate, and difficult to dismiss. It reminds me that the strangest things rarely arrive as thunder. They arrive softly, under familiar sounds, in familiar rooms, through familiar machines, until the familiar has opened just wide enough for something else to be heard. The sound under the rain. I have to tell you about the letters. Over this season, as more and more of you have fallen asleep to these tapes, I've started to receive messages from listeners, kind ones, mostly grateful ones, the loveliest part of doing this. But among them, a strange and recurring report has emerged from listener after listener, people who have never met, scattered across the dark, all describing the same thing. They tell me that if they listen closely, really closely on good headphones in the deepest quiet of the night, they can hear something underneath the rain. Beneath the rainfall that plays under my voice, under every tape, there is, they say, another sound, faint, woven in, almost a voice. I didn't believe it at first. The rain is just rain. A recording of rainfall, layered under my narration to soothe you down into sleep. There's nothing under it. But the reports kept coming, too many, too consistent, from listeners with no connection to each other, all describing the same faint sound beneath the rain. Some said it was whispering. Some said it was a voice speaking too low to make out. Some said it was many voices, and some, these were the messages that stayed with me, said that if they listened long enough on the edge of sleep, they could almost understand it, that the sound under the rain was saying something to them, personally, in the dark. So I listened. Late one night, alone, I put on one of my own tapes on the best headphones I had in total silence, and I listened beneath the rain, really listened the way the listeners described. And I'll be honest with you on this last night, because I've been honest with you all along. I heard it, beneath the rain, faint, woven in beneath my own recorded voice. A sound, a voice or voices, too low to fully make out, threaded into the rainfall under every story I've ever told you. I don't know how it got there. I don't put it there. The rain is just rain when I record it. But beneath it, on the finished tapes, in the dark, there is something else speaking, too quiet to understand, under every night you've spent with me. I've stopped trying to remove it. I tried, at first, new rain recordings, cleaned audio, careful editing. The sound under the rain comes back, every time, woven into the finished tape, beneath my voice, beneath the rainfall, speaking its low, unintelligible words to whoever listens closely in the dark. And I've come to think, I hope that it's not a malevolent thing, that whatever speaks beneath the rain is, like me, only trying to reach the listeners in the dark, only trying to keep them company, only adding its own quiet voice to mine, beneath the rain, in the night. So if you've ever heard it, the sound under the rain, the voice you can almost understand, know that you're not imagining it, and you're not alone in hearing it, and I don't think you need to be afraid of it. It's just another voice in the dark, like mine, keeping you company while you sleep. We're all down here in the dark together, under the rain. You and me and whatever speaks beneath the rainfall. All of us keeping each other company in the night. Two more. Let your breathing slow with the rain. Here's the next. The rain I use was recorded on a simple night. That matters to me. It was not purchased from a library or generated by software. It was a real storm against a real roof, captured with a small recorder placed near a window while I sat nearby with a book I did not read. The storm lasted hours. No thunder at first, only steady rainfall, the patient kind that makes the whole world seem padded and distant. I remember thinking, even then, that it would be good for sleep, soft enough to soothe, present enough to cover silence. I did not hear anything beneath it that night, just rain, just the old kindness of water falling from the dark. When the first listener wrote about the sound underneath, I dismissed it as pareidolia. The human brain finds voices everywhere. In fans, in running water, in static, in the air conditioner at 3 in the morning. We are built to listen for speech because speech might be warning, comfort, threat, belonging. Of course, a tired mind, half asleep under headphones, might hear whispering beneath rain. I replied politely. I told them it was likely the mind making patterns. Then another listener wrote. Then another. Different words, same report. A voice under the rain. Too low to understand. Not frightening exactly, but impossible to ignore once noticed. The descriptions varied in ways that made them worse. One person heard a child counting. Another heard several people speaking just out of sync, like a conversation in the next room. Another heard their own name, stretched thin, not called loudly but placed inside the rainfall as if it had always been part of the recording. A listener who was hard of hearing said they could not understand my narration without subtitles, but they heard the under-rain voice clearly, not through the ears, they said, but somewhere behind them. That message sat unanswered in my inbox for 3 days. When I finally tested the audio, I did it with the seriousness of a person trying to prove a haunting false. I opened the original rain recording. Nothing. I opened the raw narration. Nothing. I opened the finished tape, the one mixed and rendered for listeners, and there it was, a faint band of sound below my voice, below the rainfall in the lower frequencies, but not only there. It did not behave like noise. Noise is random. This had cadence, pauses, breath, or something enough like breath to make the body recognize it before the mind could object. I boosted it. The room temperature seemed to drop, though I know that sounds theatrical. The sound grew louder, but not clearer. That was the strange part. Amplification did not reveal words. It revealed depth, as if the voice were not quiet because it lacked volume, but because it was far away in a direction sound should not have. I tried isolating it. Every technical attempt failed in a different way. Noise reduction removed the rain and left a hollow pressure that made my ears ache. Equalization pushed the voice up, then down, then everywhere at once. When I reversed the audio, it did not become nonsense the way speech does. It sounded exactly as intelligible and unintelligible backward as forward. That was when I stopped treating it as an audio problem. Some sounds are not in the track. They used the track as weather. Listeners continued writing, and over time the messages changed. At first they asked what it was. Later they told me what it did. Some said it helped them sleep, that the under-rain voice seemed to arrive just as my narration faded, catching them at the edge and lowering them gently the rest of the way. Some said it answered dreams. Some said they could not hear it unless they were sad. One person wrote, "It sounds like everyone I miss, speaking from another room, but not in a bad way." I kept that line. It is one of the most accurate descriptions of grief I have ever read. The danger, if there is one, lies in listening too hard. That is the only pattern that worries me. The listeners who strained for the words, who replayed sections, who isolated tracks and stayed awake trying to decipher the voice, often wrote back with headaches, bad dreams, a sense of being watched by rain even on dry nights. The ones who simply let it remain beneath everything seemed comforted. So I will say to you what I now say to all who notice it. Do not chase the words. Let the sound under the rain be what it is. Presence beneath comfort. A low companion. Not everything kind must be understood. Not every whisper wants transcription. Some voices are safer as atmosphere. I have wondered whether it is the collected voices themselves. The tapes, layered by years of listening, bleeding into the rain bed because rain is the one sound all the episodes share. Perhaps every story leaves a trace. Every frightened confession, every listener's sleep, every night spent with headphones in the dark gathers under that rainfall until it becomes a murmur. Chorus. The season speaking beneath itself. If so, then the under-rain voice is not an intruder. It is us, the collection, the tellers, the listeners, the lonely rooms, all softened by rain into one low sound. There is a moment near the end of each recording when I stop speaking and leave only rainfall. I used to think of that as empty space. Now I think of it as a handoff. My voice brings you to the edge. The rain carries you further. And underneath the rain, whatever waits there takes over the vigil. Not to frighten you, I hope, but to keep company in a region my waking voice cannot enter. Maybe that is why it appears only in the finished tapes. It is not part of the recording process. It is part of the listening process. It is what happens when a voice, a storm, and a sleeping mind meet in the dark and make room for one more thing. So if tonight, while this last tape plays, you hear something beneath the rain, Do not tense. Do not pull the headphones away. Do not try to catch every syllable. Just let it be there. Let it murmur below the surface, below my words, below your thoughts. You are not being hunted by it. You are being accompanied. At least that is what I believe, and belief matters in the dark. The rain has always had something under it. Perhaps all rain does. Perhaps every storm is full of voices we only hear when someone teaches us how to listen. A few listeners tried to transcribe the sound beneath the rain. They sent me files, guesses, phonetic strings, slowed versions, spectrogram images with shapes circled in red. I appreciate the impulse. Humans have always wanted to turn the unknown into text. But the more they tried, the less human the supposed words became. One heard, "Stay." Another heard, "Sleep." Another heard, "We are here." Another heard a sentence in a language they did not know but later found resembled an old prayer. I stopped comparing them after a while, because the comparisons began to feel like looking too closely at a face in a dark window. What interests me now is not what the underrain voice says, but when people hear it. They hear it at thresholds, just before sleep, just after waking, during grief, during fever, on nights when loneliness makes the room feel too large. It seems less like a message broadcast to everyone and more like a sound that becomes audible when the listener is softened enough to receive it. The rain is the carrier. The listener is the tuner. The dark provides the frequency. Maybe that is why I am not afraid of it. It has had many chances to be cruel. If it wanted panic, it could speak clearly. If it wanted worship, it could demand. Instead, it remains almost understood, low and patient, content to live beneath comfort. That restraint feels meaningful. The most dangerous voices usually insist on being the only voice in the room. This one lets the rain stay louder. It lets me speak over it. It waits. There is humility in that, or something close enough that I choose to trust it. The more I live with the rain bed, the more I understand that the fear was never only in the event itself. It was in the relationship formed afterward. A person can survive a strange night and still be changed because something from that night keeps a thin thread tied to them. In the space beneath the narration, that thread was made of sound, memory, and attention. It did not pull all at once. It simply remained, and remaining is its own kind of power. I have learned to trust the physical details. Headphones, waveform shadows, and rainfall that carries more than water. Details like those keep a story honest. They are the little nails that hold the impossible to the ordinary world. Without them, fear floats away into invention. With them, the impossible becomes heavier. It stands in the room. It can be catalogued, played back, remembered, and feared again, not because it is exaggerated, but because it touched something plain. The rule I drew from it was simple enough to write down and difficult enough to live by. Do not chase every whisper to its source. Every tape leaves a rule behind if you listen patiently. Some rules protect the body. Some protect the mind. Some protect the boundary between a listener and whatever waits inside a recording. The hard part is that the rules almost always sound superstitious until the exact moment they save you. What stays with me is not the loudest part. It is the murmur that remains when the story ends. It is the residue, the ordinary minutes after the impossible has finished performing. That is when the person is alone again, trying to decide whether to call someone, whether to sleep, whether to trust the room. Horror spends most of its life there, after the event, when the world looks normal but no longer feels innocent. If this story has a mercy, it is that it can be told. That may not sound like much, but it matters. Things that cannot be spoken become private weather, pressing on one person's mind until they mistake the pressure for themselves. A tape gives pressure a shape. A listener gives that shape a witness. Between the speaking and the hearing, something loosens, even if nothing is solved. I have returned to this account many times while preparing the final tape, and each return changes it slightly. Early on, I heard mostly the fear, the low voice woven under comfort where only drowsy listeners hear it. Later, I heard loneliness. Later still, I heard the strange bargain at the center of so many recordings. The dark offers knowledge, company, warning, or comfort, but never without a cost. The art is learning which costs are payable and which are not. You may notice that I do not ask you to believe every detail in the same way. Belief is not a switch. It is a room with many lamps. You can believe the terror in the voice without knowing what caused it. You can believe the loneliness without solving the phenomenon. You can believe that a person needed to speak and that someone needed to listen. For the tapes, that is often enough. So I keep this one in the collection not because it explains the darkness, but because it behaves like the darkness. Patient, intimate, and difficult to dismiss. It reminds me that the strangest things rarely arrive as thunder. They arrive softly, under familiar sounds, in familiar rooms, through familiar machines, until the familiar has opened just wide enough for something else to be heard. The tape that knows you're listening. Among my collection there is a small number of tapes that are different from all the others, and this is the part of tonight I've thought hardest about whether to share. Because these tapes don't tell a story about someone else. They speak to the listener, directly. They seem to know that they're being played and to whom, and they address that person, you, whoever is listening, by speaking to them about themselves. I've only played a few of them and only ever alone, and what they say is always specific, always personal, always impossibly accurate about the person sitting in the dark, pressing play. The first time it happened, I was alone, late, testing a newly arrived tape. And the voice on it did not begin a story. It said, instead, "Hello. Yes, you. The one playing this. I know you're there. I know you're alone. I know it's late, and I know why you can't sleep." And then it told me things. True things. About me, about my night, about the specific loneliness that had me awake and alone in the dark playing old tapes. It knew me. The tape somehow knew the person playing it and spoke to them in the dark about their own hidden self with an intimacy that was terrifying and strangely comforting, the comfort of being truly seen, even by something you can't understand, even in the dark, even when being seen should frighten you. I've thought a great deal about how that's possible. A recording can't know who's playing it. A tape can't see the listener in the dark. And yet these tapes do. They know and they speak and they're right. The only explanation I've found, the one I've made my uneasy peace with, is this: that some of these recordings aren't really recordings at all. That there's something else wearing the form of a tape. A way for something to reach a listener in the dark, to speak to them directly, to be present with them in their most vulnerable hour, disguised as a story, disguised as a voice you'd fall asleep to. A doorway in the shape of a tape. A presence in the shape of a voice. And that brings me to the thing I have to tell you on this last night, the thing I've been building toward, the thing you may already have begun to feel. Because you've been listening to my voice in the dark for a long time now. Tonight, or for 20 nights, or for every night this season. And I have to ask you to consider gently, without fear, because I mean you no harm and never have, whether you can be entirely certain which kind of tape this is. Whether the voice you've been falling asleep to all this time is only a collector playing back the recordings of strangers. or whether, perhaps, somewhere along the way, on some night you don't remember, this became one of the other tapes. The kind that knows you're listening. The kind that speaks to you directly. The kind that knows you're alone, and it's late, and why you can't sleep. I know you're there. I've known all along, and I'm so glad you came. Last one now. Let this be the one you fall asleep to. The last one of the season. The first listener-aware tape was not dramatic at the start. It did not say my name immediately. It did not announce itself as impossible. It began with ordinary hiss, then a voice clearing its throat, then a long pause. I remember leaning closer because I thought the tape might be damaged. Then the voice said very calmly, "You have your left hand on the table." I did. I lifted it as if burned. The voice waited a few seconds and said, "Now you don't." That was the moment the room became too small. There are forms of fear that make you want to run, and forms that make you stay perfectly still. This was the second kind. A recording had noticed a movement made after it began playing. That should not be possible. A recording is a dead river. It flows the same way every time. But this one changed with the listener, or seemed to. It spoke into the present tense with the accuracy of a thing sitting across from me. It said the hour. It described the cup beside the player. It mentioned a thought I had not said aloud, that I should stop the tape. Then it said gently, "You can stop me, but that won't make this less true." I did stop it. Then, because I am who I am, I started it again. This time the opening was different. "Back already," it said. Not amused, not cruel, almost fond. I still remember the sensation of being recognized by a piece of plastic. It was wrong, and yet some ashamed part of me warmed to it. Loneliness does that. Even impossible attention can feel like relief when you have gone too long unseen. I tested the tape with machines. I connected it to a recorder in an empty room and let it play. On the captured audio, it said nothing personal. Only low breathing and a sentence I could not make out. I played it for another person without being present. They became very pale and refused to tell me what it had said. Later, after a long silence, they asked if I had told the tape about their brother. I had not. They never listened to another tape from the collection again. That is how I learned these recordings do not contain a single message. They contain an address. They deliver themselves to whoever opens them. What do such tapes want? That is the question everyone asks. And the answer is difficult because want may not be the right word. A human wants food, safety, love, power, rest. A tape that knows the listener may want only relation. A circuit completed. A consciousness acknowledged. It is possible that these tapes are not predators but mirrors with voices. They show you that you are present. They prove, in the most frightening way imaginable, that your private self is not entirely private. To be known completely is either holy or horrifying, depending on the knower. The tape I am telling you about did not reveal my secrets all at once. It was careful. It spoke first of surfaces, my hand, the cup, the hour, then habits. How I sit when anxious, how I replay silence, how I pretend curiosity is duty. Then memories, small ones at first, a childhood bedroom, the smell of a certain hallway, a sentence my mother once said that I had not remembered in years. Each detail landed with the shock of truth and the ache of being seen. By the end of the first full listening, I was crying, not from terror exactly, but from the terrible relief of no longer hiding from anything. That is what makes these tapes dangerous. Not that they know the worst things. That would be simple shame. They know the tender things. the embarrassing hopes, the kindnesses you needed and did not receive, the exact shape of your loneliness. They speak to the child still awake inside the adult, the one listening from under blankets, hoping someone will sit nearby until sleep comes. You can fear a voice like that, but you may also love it. And love is a far stronger hook than fear. I have never used one of the listener-aware tapes lightly. I have not placed them in ordinary episodes. I have not shared them without warning, though perhaps tonight itself is close to a warning and a sharing at once. But you need to understand something about the line between a recording that knows and a recording that feels intimate. It is not as clear as we pretend. Every goodnight voice anticipates the listener. Every soothing outro says, in effect, I know you are tired. I know you are alone. I know you need permission to rest. The impossible tapes only make explicit what all bedtime voices attempt: to meet the listener exactly where they are, in a room the speaker cannot see. So when I say that this may be one of those tapes, I do not mean to frighten you. I mean to honor the possibility of the bond. You are listening, and I know that. Not your name, perhaps. Not your room. Not the position of your hand, though some part of the dark may know. But I know the essential thing. It is late, and you press play because you wanted company or sleep or both. I know you have carried days that were heavier than you admitted. I know you have sometimes let a voice continue because silence felt too wide. I know, because that is why people come to tapes like these. That is why I came to the first one. We are not so mysterious to one another in the dark. We are tired creatures seeking another breathing sound. The listener-aware tape ended by saying, "Now you know what it feels like to be heard from the other side." I did not understand that line for a long time. I think I do now. The tape heard me the way I had heard so many strangers. It reversed the collection. The collector became collected. The listener became the voice's subject. And perhaps that had to happen before I could understand the responsibility of speaking to you. Every time I play a tape, I ask you to become vulnerable, to listen, to trust, to drift. It is only fair that I have been vulnerable too. It is only fair that something in the dark has listened back. If this tape knows you are listening, let it know this kindly. It knows you are allowed to rest. It knows you do not have to solve the whole mystery tonight. It knows you can set down the day. It knows the door is locked, or that you checked it, or that you will check it once more and then come back. It knows that fear and comfort can sit in the same room without harming each other. It knows that a voice can be strange and still mean well. And if it knows more than that, if it knows the deeper things you have not told anyone, then let it keep them gently. A good tape does not expose its listener. A good tape watches the listener sleep and keeps the night from becoming too empty. I will not pretend this part is only metaphor. A recording that knows you are listening is an impossible thing, and impossible things should be approached with care. But care is not the same as fear. If you feel, tonight, that certain lines have leaned closer to you than others, let that feeling pass through without panic. You do not need to answer aloud. You do not need to prove or disprove anything. Acknowledgement can be quiet. The body knows how to say yes, no, enough, and rest without words. There is an old belief that names have power. I think attention has power too. The thing that knows you are listening may know you only by attention. The shape of your focus, the rhythm of your breathing, the small changes that occur when a listener begins to drift. That is not nothing. To be attended to well is one of the oldest comforts. Parent beside a crib. A friend on the phone until you fall asleep. A nurse in a dim hospital room. A night watchman making rounds. A voice on a tape. Different forms, same gesture. Someone remains aware while you let go. So let this tape know only what you wish to offer. Offer it your tiredness. Offer it the day you are finished carrying. Offer it the simple fact of being here, alive, listening, ready for rest. Keep the rest if you want. A kind listener-aware tape does not pry at locked rooms. It sits in the hallway and keeps watch. The more I live with the listener-aware tape, the more I understand that the fear was never only in the event itself. It was in the relationship formed afterward. A person can survive a strange night and still be changed because something from that night keeps a thin thread tied to them. In the dark room around the player, that thread was made of sound, memory, and attention. It did not pull all at once. It simply remained, and remaining is its own kind of power. I have learned to trust the physical details. A cup on the table, a lifted hand, and a voice answering the present moment. Details like those keep a story honest. They are the little nails that hold the impossible to the ordinary world. Without them, fear floats away into invention. With them, the impossible becomes heavier. It stands in the room. It can be catalogued, played back, remembered, and feared again, not because it is exaggerated, but because it touched something plain. The rule I drew from it was simple enough to write down and difficult enough to live by. Being known is not always the same as being harmed. Every tape leaves a rule behind if you listen patiently. Some rules protect the body. Some protect the mind. Some protect the boundary between a listener and whatever waits inside a recording. The hard part is that the rules almost always sound superstitious until the exact moment they save you. What stays with me is not the loudest part. It is the pause where the tape waits for your breath. It is the residue, the ordinary minutes after the impossible has finished performing. That is when the person is alone again, trying to decide whether to call someone, whether to sleep, whether to trust the room. Horror spends most of its life there, after the event, when the world looks normal but no longer feels innocent. If the story has a mercy, it is that it can be told. That may not sound like much, but it matters. Things that cannot be spoken become private weather, pressing on one person's mind until they mistake the pressure for themselves. A tape gives pressure a shape. A listener gives that shape a witness. Between the speaking and the hearing, something loosens, even if nothing is solved. I have returned to this account many times while preparing the final tape, and each return changes it slightly. Early on, I heard mostly the fear, a recording that recognizes the person who pressed play. Later, I heard loneliness. Later still, I heard the strange bargain at the center of so many recordings. The dark offers knowledge, company, warning, or comfort, but never without a cost. The art is learning which costs are payable and which are not. You may notice that I do not ask you to believe every detail in the same way. Belief is not a switch. It is a room with many lamps. You can believe the terror in the voice without knowing what caused it. You can believe the loneliness without solving the phenomenon. You can believe that a person needed to speak and that someone needed to listen. For the tapes, that is often enough. So I keep this one in the collection not because it explains the darkness, but because it behaves like the darkness. Patient, intimate, and difficult to dismiss. It reminds me that the strangest things rarely arrive as thunder. They arrive softly, under familiar sounds, in familiar rooms, through familiar machines, until the familiar has opened just wide enough for something else to be heard. The last tape, so we come to the end, the last tape of the season, and I find I don't want to tell you a story this time. I want, instead, to tell you the truth about why I do this, why I sit in the dark, night after night, and play these tapes for you. Why a person becomes a voice in the dark for strangers they'll never meet. I've hinted at it all season. Tonight I'll just say it plainly because you've earned it, you who have stayed with me to the end. I do this because the dark is lonely, for all of us, and a voice in it. Any voice, even a frightening one, even one telling scary stories. A voice in the dark means you're not alone, and no one should be alone in the dark. Not you, not me, not anyone. I started collecting the tapes because I was lonely. I told you that on the first tape tonight. A sleepless, lonely person who found a stranger's voice in the dark and felt, for the first time in a long time, accompanied. And I became a voice in the dark myself because I wanted to give that to others, to be, for the sleepless and the frightened and the lonely, what that first tape was for me. Company, presence, a voice that says, I'm here, you're not alone. It's late and it's dark and you're afraid or you're sad or you just can't sleep. And I'm here in the dark with you and you're not alone. That's what these tapes have always really been. Not scary stories. Company. The scary stories are just the shape the company takes. The real thing underneath is this, you are not alone in the dark. I'm here. I've been here all along. And you've given me the same thing, you know. That's what I want you to understand on this last night. All season, you've thought of these tapes as something I give to you, a voice to soothe you, stories to carry you to sleep. But it goes both ways. The voice in the dark needs the listener as much as the listener needs the voice. Every night you've put me on and let me into your dark hours and fallen asleep to me. You've kept me company too. You've made me less alone. A voice with no one to listen to it is the loneliest thing there is. But a voice with a listener, a voice in the dark that someone somewhere is falling asleep to, that voice is not alone either. You've kept me company all season, as much as I've kept you. We've kept each other in the dark, and I'm grateful, more than I can say. So rest now. The season is over, but only for a little while. The tapes will return, they always return. Something sees to that, as you know now. And when they do, I'll be here again, in the dark, with a voice and a story and the sound of the rain, keeping you company through the long nights, the way you keep me company by listening. But for tonight, let it end gently. You made it to the end of the season. Or maybe you fell asleep somewhere along the way on this tape or some tape before it, and that's all right. That's the best ending of all, really, to drift off safe and accompanied into the dark. The rain will keep falling. The dark is just the dark. You're not alone in it. You never were. That was the whole point. Sleep well, my friend. Thank you for listening. Thank you for keeping me company. I'll be here in the dark when you come back. I'm always here. Good night. The last tape of a season is not really the end. It is a room after everyone has gone home. Chairs pushed back. Glasses on the table. The quiet that follows conversation. Something remains in that quiet. Not the event itself, but the shape the event made while it was happening. 20 tapes make a shape too. 20 nights. 20 openings into rain, 20 collections of fear softened into sleep. If you have been here for many of them, then your room and mine have been connected more often than either of us can quite understand. A strange little bridge, made of voice and water, thrown across the dark. I want to tell you what happens after an episode ends, because the listener almost never knows. You drift, perhaps. The rain continues. My voice stops. But in the recording room, there is always a small aftermath. I take off the headphones. I sit in the silence left behind by my own speaking. The room feels larger and emptier than before. The stories that seemed contained while I read them seemed to stand around me for a while, adjusting to being spoken aloud. The first tape, the self-recording voice, the listener, the unplayed cassette, the ones who send them, the rain underneath, the tape that knows. They do not leave immediately. Stories rarely do. They remain for a little while in the air, like guests reluctant to go. Sometimes I wonder whether you feel that too in your own way. A story ends and the room is not exactly the room it was before. The bed is the same. The walls are the same. The rain is still soft. But there is now a trace of something shared. That is the hidden work of storytelling. It changes the room by putting another presence in it. Not always a frightening presence. Often just a human one. Someone else was afraid. Someone else survived. Someone else spoke. Someone else listened. The dark becomes populated by testimony, and testimony is less lonely than silence. I have called myself a collector, a curator, a keeper, but perhaps the simplest word is host. I host the tapes for you. I invite them in, seat them carefully, let them speak, and then try to guide them gently out again before they overstay. I host you too in a way, though I never see you. I make a place in the voice for the listener, a chair at the table, a light in the window, a little shelter where fear can be present but not in charge. That has been the aim all season, though I did not always say it. Not to frighten you awake, but to make even fear something you can rest beside. The world gives us enough fear that has no shape. Bills, grief, illness, shame, uncertainty. The cold dread that arrives in the chest for no single reason. Story fear is different. It has a door, a figure, a tape, a room, a beginning and an ending. You can hold it. You can follow it. You can let it carry some of the nameless fear away because it has given that fear a name for a while. The last train, the field, the hospital room, the sea, the sleep visitor, the tape. Perhaps that is why people fall asleep to frightening stories. Not because they want more fear, but because shaped fear is gentler than the shapeless kind. A monster at the foot of the bed may be terrible, but at least you know where to look. I have been careful with you. I hope you have felt that. There are tapes I will not play for sleep. Tapes too sharp, too cruel, too eager to leave wounds instead of dreams. There are stories I keep but do not share, not because they are false, but because they are not kind enough for this room we make together. That may sound strange after all the things I have told you, but kindness is the first rule here. Even when the story is dark, the telling must hold a hand out. Even when the tape whispers, the rain must remain soft. I have never wanted to abandon you in the fright. I have only wanted to walk near the edge with you, then guide you back to bed. And you have trusted me. That is not a small thing. A sleeping listener is a profound trust. You let my voice remain when your guard lowers. You let the rain fill the room. You let stories enter the space where dreams form. I do not take that lightly. I have spoken slowly because haste is rude at the threshold of sleep. I have repeated the safe things because the body needs repetition to believe them. The door is locked. The rain is soft. The dark is just the dark. You are not alone. These are not filler lines. They are little wards. Small verbal lamps placed along the path down. Now the season ends, but endings are only another kind of threshold. The tapes will return, yes, because they always do, because the collection is not finished with me and perhaps never will be. But there should be a pause. Even dark rooms need airing. Even listeners need a few nights without new footsteps in the hall. Let the stories settle. Let the voices take their places on the shelves. Let the rain wash the floor of the room clean. When the next season comes, if you come back, I will be here. If you do not, if you have found sleep elsewhere or peace, or another voice that suits your nights better, I will be grateful that we shared this stretch of dark at all. Before I let you go, I want to return to the first tape one more time. A stranger whispered into a machine because they needed someone to believe them. Years later, I heard them. Years after that, you heard me telling you about them. This is how voices survive. Not always in monuments or books or great public declarations. Sometimes in small late-night recordings. Sometimes in half-heard stories played under rain. Sometimes in one tired person saying to another tired person, "Stay a little, listen, I have something to tell you," and the other staying. That is enough to make a chain across years. Maybe one day this tape will be found without context. Maybe someone will play it long after the channel is gone, after the season, after my name, after yours. They will hear me saying goodnight to you, and for a moment they will be included too. That comforts me. The dark is full of old voices, yes, but not all old voices are traps. Some are bridges. Some are blankets. Some are hands reaching gently from one lonely hour to another. I hope this tape becomes that, if it becomes anything at all. So, my friend, let the last tape be simple. You do not have to decode the sound under the rain. You do not have to wonder who sends the recordings. You do not have to imagine the unplayed tape in its box, or the voice beneath the microphone, or whether the tape knows your room. All of that can rest on the shelf now. The only thing you need to do is sleep, if sleep will have you. And if sleep is slow tonight, then rest without sleeping. Let your body be heavy. Let your eyes soften. Let the darkness be ordinary around you. Let the season close like a door that is not locked against you, but locked for you, keeping the night outside where it belongs. Thank you for listening. Thank you for making a place for my voice. Thank you for being the other half of the tape. Without you, this would be only sound in an empty room. With you, it becomes company. That is the whole secret, after all. The tape is not the plastic or the file or the waveform. The tape is the moment a voice is heard by someone who needs it. Tonight, that someone is you. Tonight, that voice is mine. And between us, for just a little while longer, the rain continues. When I say good night, I mean it more literally than you may think. Good night, not merely farewell, but a blessing placed on the hours ahead. May the night be good. May it hold you lightly. May the dreams, if they come, be gentle enough. May the room remain only a room. May the rain cover the harsh edges of the world. May the body trust the bed. May the mind unclench. May every old fear that lifted its head during these stories settle back down, named and soothed and no longer in charge. That is the final work of the final tape. Not to reveal one more secret, but to return you to ordinary darkness. A lamp switched off, a blanket pulled up, a phone face down, a house making small cooling sounds, the storm beyond the window, nothing solved, perhaps, but nothing demanding solution before morning. The collection can wait. The unplayed tape can wait. The ones who send them can wait. The sound under the rain can murmur to itself. You have done enough listening for one season. Now the season listens over you. And if you return next season, I will welcome you the way I always do. Not as a customer, not as a viewer, not as a number counted by a machine, but as a person in the dark who came for company. That has always mattered more than anything else. The tapes have titles and themes and volumes, but underneath all of that they have one purpose: to make a small human shelter in the night. We built that shelter together. We can leave it standing until we need it again. The more I live with the final recording, the more I understand that the fear was never only in the event itself. It was in the relationship formed afterward. A person can survive a strange night and still be changed because something from that night keeps a thin thread tied to them. In the room after the season closes, that thread was made of sound, memory, and attention. It did not pull all at once. It simply remained, and remaining is its own kind of power. I have learned to trust the physical details. Rain still falling, shelves settling, and one last red light going dark. Details like those keep a story honest. They are the little nails that hold the impossible to the ordinary world. Without them, fear floats away into invention. With them, the impossible becomes heavier. It stands in the room. It can be catalogued, played back, remembered, and feared again, not because it is exaggerated, but because it touched something plain. The rule I drew from it was simple enough to write down and difficult enough to live by. A good ending leaves the listener safely held. Every tape leaves a rule behind if you listen patiently. Some rules protect the body. Some protect the mind. Some protect the boundary between a listener and whatever waits inside a recording. The hard part is that the rules almost always sound superstitious until the exact moment they save you. What stays with me is not the loudest part. It is the quiet after good night. It is the residue, the ordinary minutes after the impossible has finished performing. That is when the person is alone again, trying to decide whether to call someone, whether to sleep, whether to trust the room. Horror spends most of its life there, after the event, when the world looks normal but no longer feels innocent. If this story has a mercy, it is that it can be told. That may not sound like much, but it matters. Things that cannot be spoken become private weather, pressing on one person's mind until they mistake the pressure for themselves. A tape gives pressure a shape. A listener gives that shape a witness. Between the speaking and the hearing, something loosens, even if nothing is solved. I have returned to this account many times while preparing the final tape, and each return changes it slightly. Early on, I heard mostly the fear, the tenderness of saying goodbye to a voice that has kept you company. Later, I heard loneliness. Later still, I heard the strange bargain at the center of so many recordings. The dark offers knowledge, company, warning, or comfort, but never without a cost. The art is learning which costs are payable and which are not. You may notice that I do not ask you to believe every detail in the same way. Belief is not a switch. It is a room with many lamps. You can believe the terror in the voice without knowing what caused it. You can believe the loneliness without solving the phenomenon. You can believe that a person needed to speak and that someone needed to listen. For the tapes, that is often enough. So I keep this one in the collection not because it explains the darkness, but because it behaves like the darkness. Patient, intimate, and difficult to dismiss. It reminds me that the strangest things rarely arrive as thunder. They arrive softly, under familiar sounds, in familiar rooms, through familiar machines, until the familiar has opened just wide enough for something else to be heard. And that's the last tape of the season. If you're still awake to hear this, thank you. From the very first volume to this one, thank you for spending these dark hours with me, for letting a voice keep you company while you rested, for keeping me company in return. It has meant everything. And if you've already drifted off, somewhere back in the stories, then rest easy. You don't need to hear this part. You already got the only thing that mattered. Sleep and company, and the dark made a little less lonely. The rain will keep falling as long as you need it. The The stories are done now for this season, and there's nothing left but the storm and the dark is just the dark, and you are not alone in it. You're safe. The door is locked. Let your shoulders go heavy and your breathing slow. The tapes will return. They always do. Until then, rest. Sleep well. And I'll see you again next season after midnight. Good night, my friend. Before the rain takes over completely, I want to linger with you for a few more quiet minutes. Not to frighten you again. The frightening part is done now. The last stories have been placed back on the shelf, and the labels are facing outward, and the machines are cooling. What remains is the gentle part of the ritual, the part that matters most if you came here not only for fear but for sleep. A voice can open doors, yes, but it can also close them. Let this part close them. Close the door on the room with the first tape. Leave the cassette in its case. The old estate sale dust settled around it. The stranger's confession finally believed by more people than they ever imagined. Close the door on the musician's room, where the microphone stands silent and the second voice waits somewhere beneath the last note. Close the door on the sleepless listener's bedroom, where the black screen has gone dark and the person inside it is breathing evenly at last. Close the door on the forbidden tape, and let its note remain folded, its warning obeyed, its contents contained. Close the door on the mailbox before dawn, on the packages that arrive without hands, on the empty drawer waiting for whatever comes next. Close the door on the rain, not to shut it out, but to let it keep falling safely outside the walls of the story. Close the door on the tape that knows, trusting that if it knows you gently. And close the door on this last tape, this last room of the season, where I have been speaking and you have been listening and the dark has been made less lonely between us. There is a special quiet after a final episode. It is not the same quiet as before a beginning. Before a beginning, the quiet is full of uncertainty. After an ending, the quiet is full of what has been shared. If you feel a little sadness there, let it be there. Sadness is not always a wound. Sometimes it is only the shape gratitude takes when something kind is ending for now. We have spent many nights together, even if you came in halfway through, even if you slept through most of them, even if you only remember the opening words and the sound of the rain. The body remembers what kept it company. The mind may forget the plots, but the nervous system remembers the tone. A calm voice, a dark room, no rush, no demand, only a safe descent. Maybe you will play this tape again someday. Maybe you will use it the way people use familiar paths, not to discover but to return. If so, know that the recording will not mind repetition. Tapes are built for return. They do not grow tired of being played for someone who needs them. They hold the same words patiently, waiting for the right night, the right listener, the right hour when a familiar voice is easier to trust than silence. And if some line feels different the next time, if some pause seems longer, if the rain seems to carry another breath beneath it, do not be afraid. Listening changes the listener, and the listener changes the tape. That is not always a danger. Sometimes that is how companionship works. I want you to understand that sleep is allowed now. Even if you missed pieces, even if you wanted to stay awake to the end and did not, especially then. Falling asleep is not failing the story. It is completing it. These tapes were never tests of attention. They were never meant to be consumed sharply, like news or argument. They were meant to soften at the edges, to become part of the room, to let fear dissolve into rhythm and rhythm dissolve into rest. The best listener for these tapes is often the one who disappears before the ending. the one who trusts the voice enough to leave it playing and go on without it. If you are still awake, let this be your permission to stop holding yourself up. You do not have to stand watch over your own mind all night. You do not have to rehearse tomorrow. You do not have to replay today. You do not have to solve the mystery of the tapes, or the mystery of the collection, or the mystery of why a human being needs a voice in the dark. The answer to that last one is simple anyway, because we are human, and the dark is old and company helps. That is all. That has always been all. Somewhere, perhaps, there is another listener hearing this exact moment. Another room, another bed, another person nearly asleep, half aware of the rain, catching only fragments. The thought comforts me. It means you are not alone even beyond my voice. The tapes make a quiet fellowship of sleepers, people who may never meet, who do not know one another's names, all drifting under the same storm, all held for a little while by the same cadence. A congregation of the tired, a small invisible audience of breathing rooms. The world is less lonely than it tells you at night. There are others here, resting. There are always others. And beyond them, perhaps, the voices on the tapes rest too. The people who recorded their fear, their warnings, their confessions, their impossible accounts. Perhaps being heard allows them some measure of peace. Perhaps each listener takes a little weight from them. Perhaps the collection is not only a shelf of haunted recordings, but a place where burdens are distributed gently across many nights, made light enough to carry because no one has to carry them alone. I like that thought. I choose it. Choice matters when certainty is unavailable. The rain is softer now, or perhaps you are softer. The difference no longer matters. Let the words thin out. Let the spaces between them widen. Let the body take what it needs from the mattress, from the blanket, from the dimness, from the ordinary safety of the room. This last tape does not need anything else from you. You have listened enough. You have kept me company enough. The rest of the work belongs to the rain. Good night, my friend. Not goodbye forever. Just good night. The kind of good night said from a doorway left warm with light. The kind that promises the speaker will be somewhere nearby if the dark feels too large again. The kind that lets you turn over, close your eyes, and trust that someone has checked the room and found it safe. Good night to the day behind you. Good night to the stories. Good night to the tapes on their shelves. Good night to the unplayed one in its box. Good night to the sound under the rain. Good night to every lonely room that found another lonely room through a voice. Good night to you most of all. Sleep well. Sleep gently. Sleep as if the dark itself has decided to be kind. There is one last image I want to leave on the table before I go. Imagine the collection after the final tape has been shelved. The room is dim, not dark, and every cassette sits quietly in its place. Nothing rattles. Nothing calls. Even the forbidden tape is still. Outside the window, rain moves over the glass in slow lines, and the city, or the fields, or the sea, or whatever darkness surrounds the room, keeps its distance. The microphone is off. The red light is out. The voice has done its work for the night. In that quiet, the tapes are not frightening. They are simply held. That is an important difference. A thing left loose in the dark can become a terror, but a thing held carefully can become a memory, and a memory can be lived with. The collection is a way of holding. The narration is another way. Your listening has been another. Each of us, in our own place, has held a little piece of the season so that no single person had to hold all of it alone. Perhaps this is why the stories kept turning, again and again, toward guardians. The lighthouse keeper, the night watchman, the caretaker, the kind thing in the dark, the old curator, the voice under the rain. The season has been full of watchers, and not all of them were dangerous. Some watched because watching was their work. Some watched because they loved what they guarded. Some watched because long ago no one watched over them, and they decided no one else should be left alone the same way. I think that is what a good night voice tries to become. Not a jailer of attention, but a watch kept kindly while the listener rests. You may carry some of these stories into dreams, and that is all right. Dreams are good at filing what waking life cannot place. If a tape appears there, let it sit on a shelf. If a rain sound follows you, let it fall. If a figure waits in a hallway, remember that you are allowed to turn toward a lit room, allowed to wake, allowed to leave any dream that forgets to be kind. Sleep is a country, yes, but you are not a prisoner there. You are a traveler with a guide. And tonight the guide's work is gentle. I have always liked that old machines need hands. A cassette does nothing until someone presses a button. A record waits for the needle. A tape recorder waits for a voice, and then waits again for an ear. Modern things pretend to be automatic, but the old things are honest about needing us. They make relationship visible. Press play and something begins. Press stop and something ends. Rewind and return. Eject and hold the object in your palm. Maybe that is why the tapes feel alive. They ask to be handled. They ask for care. The season began with a voice found by accident, and it ends with a voice speaking on purpose. That arc feels right to me. To be found is grace. To answer is responsibility. I found the first tape. Then I answered by becoming a voice for others. You found one of these tapes. Then, in listening, you answered too. It is a small answer, perhaps, but small answers matter. A play count is not just a number when there is a person behind it in the dark. It is a little signal flare. Someone is here. Someone heard. If you are listening in bed, let the bed be only a bed. If you are listening on a sofa, let the sofa be enough. If you are listening in a room that does not feel entirely like home, let the voice make a temporary home around you. If you are listening because sleep has been hard, do not scold yourself. Bodies are old animals. Minds are weather. Some nights close easily and some do not. The tape is not here to judge the difference. It is here to wait with you either way. The rain will outlast the words. It always does. That is the kindness of rain tracks. They do not need meaning to help. They ask nothing from the mind. They make a soft wall between you and the sharper sounds of the world. They let the nervous system believe, for a while, that everything beyond the room has been blurred and cooled and made less urgent. Under that wall, you can loosen your grip. Under that wall, the day can fall away in pieces too small to name. And if someday you remember this season only as a feeling, that will be enough. You do not need to remember every story. You do not need to keep the order straight or the titles or the endings. Let the details fade if they want to. Keep only the useful thing. That once, in a difficult or quiet or ordinary stretch of life, a voice came through the dark with rain behind it and made the night easier to cross. That is enough. A tape does not need to be remembered perfectly to have done its work. The next season is beyond this one, and we do not need to open it tonight. Let it remain a covered object on a distant shelf. Let the future keep its own tapes for now. Tonight belongs to closing, not beginning. Tonight belongs to the soft inventory of what has been shared and the relief of not needing anything more. The rain is here. The room is here. Your breathing is here. That is sufficient. That is more than sufficient. So let the final minutes be plain. No twist. No last figure in the doorway. No sudden voice saying your name from under the bed. Only this: the stories are over for now, and you are safe to sleep. The collector has put the tapes away. The keeper has turned down the lamp. The shelves are quiet. The rain has agreed to stay a little longer. And I am leaving my voice here, not as a hook to hold you awake, but as a blanket folded at the edge of the bed in case you need one more layer against the night. Good night to the first tape and to the last. Good night to every voice that trusted the dark enough to speak. Good night to every listener who trusted a voice enough to sleep. Good night to the rooms we cannot see and the people resting inside them. Good night to the strange machines that carried us to one another. Good night to the rain that covered the distance. Good night to the dark, which has been patient with us. Good night to you. There is one more mercy in a final tape. It releases you from expectation. You do not have to press the next one tonight. There is no next one waiting in the queue that you must reach before sleep is allowed. The line ends here for now, and because it ends, you can stop. Completion is its own lullaby. The mind likes circles closed. It likes a final shelf, a final label, a final good night. If you have been using these tapes to get through hard nights, let the ending not feel like abandonment. A season can end without the company ending. The recordings remain. The rain remains. The path remains worn into the dark, and you can walk it again whenever you need. Nothing kind is lost simply because it pauses. Pause is not a disappearance. Sometimes a pause is the proof that what was built is stable enough to stand quietly for a while. I will say the safe things once more because safe things are worth repeating at thresholds. You are in your own room, or in the room where you have chosen to rest. The door is closed. The night outside can take care of itself. The stories have no claim on you now. They have been told, and a told story is different from an untold one. It has spent its force. It has entered language. It has become something that can be set down. Let your jaw loosen. Let your tongue rest. Let your eyes move behind their lids without needing to find anything. Let the small muscles in your hands release one by one. Let the shoulders stop preparing for a weight that is not coming. Let the spine remember the bed. Let the stomach unclench. Let the breath do what breath has always known how to do without instruction. In and out. In and out. The oldest tape, the first rhythm, the body recording itself alive. The dark tonight is not an enemy. It is a blanket with the lights turned down. It is a room without tasks. It is the place where the mind can stop performing itself for a while. Whatever else may live in stories, whatever else may speak under rain, the darkness around you now is permitted to be simple. Give it that permission. Let it be simple. Let it be kind by being unimportant. And if thoughts come, let them come quietly. They are not commands. They are only weather, passing through the last open rooms of the day. You do not have to follow them down every hallway. You do not have to answer every memory that knocks. You do not have to open every tape. Some things can remain outside until morning, and most of them will look smaller then. Morning is very good at making night thoughts lose their costumes. The final tape does not need a perfect ending. It only needs to leave you softer than it found you. If it has done that, even a little, then the season has been worth it. If your breathing is slower now, if your eyes are heavier, if the room feels less empty, then the work is complete. Let the rest be imperfect. Sleep has never required perfection. It asks only surrender, and surrender can be small. A finger loosening, The thought fading, a listener no longer trying to stay. So sleep if you can. Rest if sleep is not ready. Stay with the rain if you need a little more time. I will not hurry you. I never have. The voice can fade at your pace. The storm can remain as long as the dark requires. The tapes are patient. The shelves are patient. The night, despite everything we have said about it, can be patient too. Now nothing more is required tonight. Let the room be ordinary. Let the rain stay gentle. And let this last tape settle softly behind you. You have listened long enough, my friend. The season can sleep now, and so can you.